So I'm going to start with this. So what if, we all teach economics here, what if you assigned a homework assignment and your students submitted something like this? I'm just going to zoom in on that a little bit. What's that? Well, if you're anything like me, when you see something like that, you go, touchdown, that is awesome. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Hall of Fame writing assignments and what we can learn about a student's critical thinking. And I'm Tom Andrews. I'm from Westchester University, and I do teach principles of microeconomics. And Westchester University is not Harvard or Yale. It's a 17,000 student AACSB accredited business school in Southeast Pennsylvania. And everything I'm going to talk about today is about the principles, freshman level courses at that university. So I'm going to start 2008. So that was my 15th year at Westchester University teaching principles of microeconomics. And in the fall of 2008, I was making up an exam and I was bored. And I didn't want to do it. And I turned to the test banks for a question. So I was working on the essay question, which is what question am I going to use for the essay? And I went to the test bank and there was something like this: relate the declaration of war on terrorism to the production possibility curve. And there was an answer given that looked something like this. And that whole thing had no appeal to me, none whatsoever. So I quit doing that altogether and went and surfed the internet. And I came across a real world problem, which was this. So that is a dam on the Elwha River in Washington State. And in 2008, they were debating taking out that dam. So there were some issues there. One is the dam was in the way of the migrating salmon. On the other hand, the hydropower the dam was generating was relatively inexpensive, and the aluminum industry was concerned if they took out the dam, there would be massive unemployment. So this is the newspaper article I was reading. And I thought, wow, that's perfect. There's a trade-off from one good to another. I'll just slap this sentence on top of that newspaper article, stick it on the exam, and pass it out to the students. So that's exactly what I did. Minus all of this stuff and the photograph. Newspaper article, that sentence, provide a complete economic analysis. And then I waited for the real world problem question answer. And I was hoping for something along these lines: production possibility curve, two goods, showing the trade-off between aluminum and salmon, and maybe, if I'm really lucky, showing some unemployment in the process. That is not what happened. What happened was way worse than that. I mean, they had graphs for sure showing the trade-off between unemployment and dams, between electricity and labor, and all kinds of stuff that you could barely qualify as economics. And so I graded the thing and I gave it back to him, and then a bunch of them immediately went to the chair of the department and complained about me. The chair of the department called me in and said, "Tom, you cannot expect a freshman to read a newspaper article and provide an economic analysis during an exam." And this is where that self-assurance thing sort of kicks in, and I thought, well, no, that's just not right. Number one, they're all high school graduates. They can read a newspaper, at least most of them. And again, this was 2008 when some people still read. And then the other is, I've been spending weeks and weeks and weeks teaching them economics. They ought to be able to marry the two and give me something. But I realized the problem was that I had not prepared them to do something like that. That was my fault. So I changed the grades. I'm not going to bury anybody over my mistake. When I find out how wrong I am, I eventually admit to it. But what I did was I revamped my entire teaching strategy, and I kept asking those questions over and over and over again. Real world problem, provide an economic analysis. I never gave them any clues. Just provide a complete economic analysis of the following real world problem. And one day, after lots of trial, an enormous amount of error, a student submitted something like this. Actually, this is what she submitted to me. And I thought, that's it. Finally, this is what I'm looking for. So I had just given them an article about a crazy potato cartel in Idaho from NPR. And I said, provide a complete economic analysis. And the student created these graphs. Everything is properly labeled and in the right spots with values that represent like realistic magnitudes. And I thought, wow, that is something. That is something. And I got goosebumps. And I told Sarah, this is fantastic. This is the most beautiful thing I've seen since my wife. And I'm going to frame this and put it on my wall. And so that's the day I started the Wall of Fame, where I just hang the assignments that are like so good you can't even believe it. And what's happening now is that sort of thing is happening over and over and over again, pretty regularly for me. Not every student submits that stuff. I mean, they're freshmen, but some do, for sure. And a lot of them get pretty darn close. So I started thinking about, like, well, what can we say about what the student is thinking when they're developing an answer like that? So I went to the Bloom's Taxonomy. It's sort of the cornerstone of critical thinking, and you're all educators. I'm sure you're relatively familiar with that. The bottom is the low-level stuff, comprehension, and the top is evaluation. And then if you're not sure where the dividing line is between all those things, luckily they provide an overwhelming array of verbs to help you decide what is what. All right, so this is, by the way, 7 years later. So this is not an easy process. This is a slog for me, but I'm finally getting around probably to where I should have started. Let's say. So that brings us to the essay question, which is when you put an essay question on the test, what level of critical thinking is the student doing? So for example, the war on terror thing, we back that out to Bloom's taxonomy. My curiosity is like, where on that scale would be that, what I feel is a fairly simple question. So this is where we're going to get our reef clickers out. And what I want you to do is just tell me, and I think it's all anonymous and nobody's going to receive a grade for this. You can log in and tell me what level of thinking you think that is. Just take a wild stab. Is it not working? Well, don't look that close. Don't sit up front. All right. I'll give this a second and see if some people spin in. And whenever you think we've got enough, I don't know if I can punch that from here. Okay. Are you going to get it right? That's probably good enough. Let's see what the audience says. Okay, most people are putting that around C. It's interesting, only 2 people put that at E, still climbing. All right, that's probably where I would have stuck it. You know, it's obviously not the lowest level. I wouldn't put it at the highest level. I'm going to move forward. Fortunately, let's see if we can get this going again. I think we might be interfering with my clicker. There we go. Fortunately, whoops, sorry. Evaluation. The test bank tells you what level of thinking this is according to Bloom. Now, I don't know who put that word in the test bank. You got it right? Yep. Or you were the one who wrote this question and identified it as evaluation in Bloom. So that relatively minor question, in my opinion, receives the highest ranking in the Bloom's taxonomy. So you can argue with the test bank if you want. But if you compare that to the real world problem question, there is a lot more going on here. Number one, I didn't tell the student to use a production possibility curve. They brought that to the table. I didn't tell them what the 2 goods would be. They brought that to the table. I didn't tell them to make a differentiation between resources and goods. They did all of that. So is that still just evaluation? Or is something wrong here? Well, this is the problem I have with Bloom. So even if it is evaluation, if they don't do it, then well, what is it? If they fail at evaluation, maybe they've succeeded at something else, but it's hard to say what that is. So I went back into the critical thinking literature and came across this higher order thinking idea. And here's the definition. It's kind of long, but I'll read it for you. Higher order thinking occurs when a person takes new information and information stored in memory and interrelates and extends this information to find possible answers in a perplexing situation. So that's thinking. And I think that sounds to me like thinking like an economist. And usually when economists write about critical thinking, they just say, okay, we're just teaching students to think like economists. And if you had that definition, that would be right. Okay, think about it this way. The information stored in memory is like all your knowledge of economics. And then you take the new information from the world, which is some problem, and you mash the two together. And you create some sort of solution. The actual definition is a little bit longer than that. Took it out for brevity. There's two pieces to this I think that are important. One is the information has to be new. So if you're showing them the same information over and over and over again, it sort of comes off the higher order and moves down to the lower order. And then it also has to be relatively perplexing. And the more perplexing, the higher up it gets. But if you take away those two pieces, it's not higher order thinking, it's lower order thinking. So Marzano has created a taxonomy that goes from lower order to higher order, where the lowest order is retrieval, which is recognition and recall. That corresponds pretty well to the bottom end of the Bloom's pyramid. And then the highest order is knowledge utilization, problem solving, experiment, investigating. So in my mind, when we think about economics, this is like what we ask a PhD student to do, right? You fill them with all this economic material, and then they reach out into the world and find some new place to apply it, investigate, research, experiment, and bring new stuff to the table. Well, in between those two levels is, I think, where we have our undergraduate education, analysis and comprehension, and again, with the words to describe that. So what I'm going to do is, I have two slides. The first one describes what I think comprehension is, and the second one is analysis. And we'll go back to the same problem. So this is comprehension. And here's the question. Use the PPC to demonstrate unemployment. So this is what I think very similar to the test bank essay question. The key is, though, you say use a PPC. So right there, this becomes pretty easy. Because the student just has to retrieve a PPC, something like that. And then to demonstrate unemployment, all they have to do is put the dot inside. So what they're doing there is integrating information and symbolizing it. Analysis is the next step up. So you start with a question like this: provide an economic analysis, where you don't tell them what model to use, and then when they create something like this, there's a lot going on there. First thing is they say, all right, in that article, it's obviously a trade-off between two goods. We can model that using a PPC. So that's generalizing. And then they say, all right, we're going to sift through this article and we're going to pull out what are the goods and what are the resources. And we're going to put the goods on the PPC and we're going to leave the resources somewhere else. So that's this stuff and this stuff and this stuff. So that's the matching and classifying. And then the last piece is where they say, all right, the salmon are endangered, so we need to start from a spot where there isn't very much salmon, and then we're going to create some unemployment, so we're going to move the dot from a point of endangered salmon down inside the curve, and that's specifying. So that's what they're applying the knowledge to this particular situation in this particular way. So they can succeed or fail in any number of ways, mismatching the goods and the resources, not specifying the proper position, but they can get some things right and some things wrong. And if they get them all right, then they've done a pretty high-level thinking job. So that sort of forms the core of what I'm thinking for a Hall of Fame homework assignment. So the assignment is simple. Provide a complete economic analysis of the following, and then you hit them with a real-world problem. After that, it's really hard, because what happens is you get back information that you weren't expecting. And you have to come to grips with your failure as an instructor and look how to improve what you're doing in the classroom. Fortunately, we have tremendous resources now. So if anybody is using Turnitin or the GradeMark, I think that is a fantastic way to provide very detailed feedback in a fairly efficient manner, so you can point out specifically where they're going wrong. They have the rubrics, which don't get into the small detail, but at a high level, you can figure out, give feedback how they're doing. And by the way, if you create a great set of instructions, then what you're getting will be more uniform and easier for you to analyze. And then finally, like down here, this last bit down in here is probably the most important, because if you want to do this, you're going to have to probably change the way you teach. So if you're not flipping a classroom, you're probably going to have to flip it and treat it more like part lecture, part lab. And if you're not doing audience interaction, you're probably going to have to do audience interaction. And if you're stuck with the dusty PowerPoints, you might want to liven them up. And the last thing I put down there is the psychology. And then David started talking about psychology, and now I'm really going to be out of my depth. But my sister-in-law is she teaches psychology at a community college, and she's always gone on and on about having a, what is it? Growth mindset. Which is when you make a mistake and then you learn from it, like that one right there. I probably should have put growth mindset right on the slide. So because what happens is students need to fail over and over and over again. The students are obsessed with what is the right answer. And I am constantly telling you, number one, I am not going to tell you what the right answer is. And number two, there isn't a right answer usually. There is not so good answers and better answers. And then they make mistakes over and over and over again, but every time they make a mistake, and I'm encouraging them to make mistakes, they get better and better and better at it. So it's a long and drawn out, painful process for everybody involved, but it is also rewarding. The students, I mean, this is the feedback I'm getting. I mean, if the student says something is tough but interesting, that's pretty high praise, I think. That's exactly how they spelled it. I cut and pasted from the, yeah. Well, you know, when I ask them to do the assignment, I say I want the grammar and whatnot to be perfect, but on the feedback, I didn't make that insistence. And by the way, perfect grammar for them often means no periods. I don't know what's going on with that recently. But they appreciate the realism, and especially the better students really appreciate the opportunity to do something really special beyond just filling in the blanks and whatnot. So here's my challenge to you. Ditch your text bank. Put this sentence up there. Provide a complete economic analysis of the following real-world problem. And then hit them with a real-world problem. This is one I threw out recently. Bird flu killed a bunch of chickens. Eggs disappeared from the market. Bakers were going crazy because they couldn't make their cupcakes. So I said, provide a complete real-world analysis. And you could do something like that. And with any luck at all, eventually, the students will submit something like that. You could put it in a frame. Get your goosebumps. Start your own wall of fame. Thank you very much.